Captain Jack Churchill was not a man who fit into anyone's idea of a modern soldier. At 33 years old, with 14 years since Sandhurst behind him and not a single confirmed kill to his name, he crouched behind a crumbling stone wall near the village of Lepinay on May 27, 1940, watching 5 German soldiers advance through the mist. France was collapsing. The Wehrmacht had steamrolled Poland in just over a month. Now, with terrifying speed, they were racing across Western Europe, overrunning town after town. The British Expeditionary Force was in full retreat, scrambling toward Dunkirk. Soldiers were discarding rifles, abandoning vehicles, burying equipment, and burning documents. The war was slipping away from them, but Jack Churchill was not retreating. What he carried wasn't a rifle or machine gun. Slung across his back was a 6-foot English longbow with a 70-pound draw weight, capable of launching a shaft with deadly precision up to 200 yards. Churchill had represented Great Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo, and though he finished 26th, his skill with the bow was more than just sport. It was lethal. He drew the string back to his ear, exhaled with the calm of a man in perfect control, and let the arrow fly. The German sergeant dropped without a sound, the shaft buried in his chest. It was the first confirmed longbow kill in modern warfare since the 1600s, and the last. The British Army didn't know what to do with a man like Jack Churchill. After serving in Burma with the Manchester Regiment, he left the army in 1936, bored with peacetime soldiering. He edited newspapers in Nairobi, appeared in films as an archer and bagpiper, and rode motorcycles through India, once crashing into a water buffalo. When war returned, so did Churchill. But he didn't come back quietly. He brought his broadsword, his bagpipes, and his longbow. His fellow officers thought him eccentric. His superiors thought him unfit. But Churchill understood something about war that the manuals didn't. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about fear. A man charging you with a sword, shrieking through the din of battle, was not something the average soldier was prepared for. And a silent arrow in the dark, that was terror. Following Dunkirk, Churchill volunteered for a new elite force, the Commandos. Their mission was simple: carry out high-risk raids against Nazi positions in occupied Europe. The training was brutal. Long marches through Scottish mountains, freezing amphibious landings, knife fighting, and hand-to-hand combat became routine. Live rounds flew inches over their heads in training. Only the toughest remained. Churchill was one of them. He thrived under pressure. Older than most, yet stronger, faster, and more relentless. He could shoot, march, and fight harder than men a decade his junior. When others thought his ancient weapons were a stunt, they began to realize they were strategy. His sword, bow, and pipes weren't just relics, they were weapons of psychological warfare. In December 1941, during Operation Archery, he led his men in a dawn raid against the German-held Norwegian island of Vågsøy. As landing craft smashed through freezing waters, Churchill stood tall in the bow, bagpipes blaring. The Germans were stunned. No amount of training prepared them for a madman with a broadsword and pipes playing March of the Cameron Men amid artillery fire. Once ashore, Churchill hurled grenades, drew his sword, and stormed forward. The battle was chaos, screams, gunfire, explosions. Yet within 10 minutes, his commandos had destroyed enemy bunkers, anti-aircraft batteries, and coastal guns. One German officer surrendered in disbelief, captured not by bullets but by sheer audacity. Churchill's tactics worked. Hitler diverted 30,000 troops to defend Norway's coastlines. One raid by a few hundred commandos had locked down a division's worth of men. Next came Sicily. The Allied invasion in July 1943 was massive. Churchill landed with No. 2 Commando, sword at his hip, pipes under his arm. The Germans had fortified villages, mined roads, and dug in panzer divisions. Yet Churchill moved through the hills with precision, striking supply lines, gathering intel, and keeping enemy forces on edge. When the Allies invaded Salerno that September, Churchill's unit defended a critical junction for 5 days against relentless German attacks. Outnumbered and running low on ammunition, they held firm. Then, in a daring night operation, Churchill took just one corporal and infiltrated a German-held hilltop observation post near the town of Molina. Crawling through ditches and darkness, they reached the enemy. With sword in hand and revolver ready, Churchill approached like a ghost. German soldiers, stunned into submission, surrendered without a shot fired. By dawn, he'd captured 42 enemy troops and returned to British lines. That raid earned him the Distinguished Service Order. He'd captured more men than most entire units, armed with a sword. In 1944, the war dragged on. The Italian campaign was a stalemate, and Churchill's unit was sent to Yugoslavia to support Tito's partisans. There, amid brutal mountain warfare, he led raids that disrupted German operations, destroyed equipment, and inspired local fighters. His name spread like wildfire. The Germans didn't know what to believe. Some called him a legend. Others feared he was a demon. He was both. In May 1944, he led British and partisan forces to assault the German-held island of Brac. Churchill landed with his men at night, but delays gave the Germans time to prepare. The next day, under a hail of machine gun fire, he led a charge, sword raised, pipes blaring. Mortar shells exploded, men fell. A blast killed everyone around him. Churchill survived, standing slightly apart, playing his pipes to rally his men. He was captured finally by the Germans. They flew him to Berlin, convinced he was related to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. When they discovered he wasn't, they sent him to Sachsenhausen, a concentration camp for high-profile prisoners. But Churchill wasn't broken. He plotted his escape with other officers, digging a tunnel by hand from a garden drain. On September 23, 1944, they broke out under the wire. He walked through Germany with one of the Great Escape survivors, evading patrols, living off the land. They made it within kilometers of the Baltic coast before capture. He was imprisoned again, this time in Austria. When SS units tried to march him and other prisoners to be used as hostages, Wehrmacht officers intervened and freed them. But Churchill didn't wait for Allied rescue. He walked 150 kilometers through the Italian Alps alone, wounded and starving, until he stumbled into an American unit. No uniform, no documents, just the look of a man who had fought too long to stop. He returned to Britain in May 1945, just as the war in Europe ended. But Churchill didn't rest. He immediately requested a transfer to the Pacific. He was on his way to Burma when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed. Japan surrendered. The war was over. Churchill was furious. Without the atomic bombs, he joked, the war might have gone on another 10 years. He couldn't sit still. In 1948, in the final months of the British Mandate in Palestine, Churchill found himself once again in the middle of chaos. After an Arab ambush massacred a Jewish medical convoy, hundreds of civilians were trapped. Churchill coordinated their evacuation personally, navigating through contested zones with nothing but a smile and his famous calm. 700 lives were saved. Even peace could not tame him. He qualified as a parachutist in his 40s, just to feel the adrenaline. He surfed the River Severn's tidal bore, one of the first surfers in Britain. He threw his briefcase from moving trains to land in his backyard. He built model boats, piloted steamboats, and played his bagpipes at memorials. He never boasted, never exaggerated. If you asked, he would tell you stories, often with a glass of wine in hand. But he didn't seek glory. His truth needed no embellishment. Jack Churchill died on March 8, 1996, at 89 years old, peacefully, at home, surrounded by family, a man who had fought in jungles, on beaches, through cities, and across continents, a man who lived like no other. If Churchill hadn't existed, it would have been impossible to invent him. A longbowman in the age of tanks, a swordsman in the age of machine guns, a musician under mortar fire, a ghost in the dark, a warrior of another era who showed the world that courage, creativity, and madness could shape history as powerfully as any weapon.